Hey everyone, this is JC. We are on the bubble. Today we are with Squid from North America, RLCS admin. How are you doing today, Squid?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me on. Very much appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk a little bit more about the back end of things. It's not something that people talk about a lot. So
Yeah, it's very hard to have a well-run tournament without people making it well-run. As far as I understand, that's kind of your main job is keeping things running smoothly and making sure things are set up properly and all that.
yeah, generally speaking, we had a little bit of time you and I to talk about this just before we started the recording, but I will admit, I'm one of the lesser experienced admins when it comes down to it. There's some people who have been in the scene for quite a long time that I get to work with on the NA side of RLCS. But yeah, generally that's what it comes down to. We make sure that the matches run smoothly. We're ready to pause the game at the drop of a hat. We got to be paying constant attention to make sure that people are getting the best competitive experience that they possibly can. And there have been a couple of posts out there about, oh, should the admin have paused here? I guarantee you, we are always doing our very best to make sure that we maintain the competitive integrity of the game. So
Yeah, so you guys are the refs of Rocket League, essentially.
pretty much, yeah. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that just about everybody who works on the back end has the utmost passion for the game. So you could not ask for a better team.
That's awesome. Or I guess the first question is, how did you get into admitting? That seems like a very specific job that nobody would necessarily know to apply for.
No, I agree. It does seem a little bit niche when you think about it, but and I just mentioned there's a lot of people who I get to work with who've been doing admin for quite a long time. They're doing the bracket stuff way back in the day for community orgs, so they're making sure that all runs well. They're doing tournament organization for some of those older community orgs like Nexus Gaming. I know Rival, who still occasionally run some sideswipe stuff. I don't know if they're still involved in regular Rocket League at this point. You know, they got they got Quent running stuff over there. They got Husky, who came from Rival, helping with RLCS on the NA side as well. So there's a lot of more experienced mods in that regard. But for me personally, so the audience may or may not know, and I definitely told you, I have done a lot of commentary in the past. I've been doing collegiate Rocket League for some time now, including being a part of the B stream for a long time, which I'm very grateful for. It's been an absolutely wonderful experience, pleasurable all around. And when I'm doing that, you kind of get a glimpse into what the admin side looks like. You see what the admin does in the lobby. This also goes for when I was doing a little bit of the RLCS grid or regionals occasionally back in RLCSX, or maybe even a little bit of RLCS 21, 22. And you kind of get to see that over time. So as time goes on, I realize like I'm getting very familiar with the rules and how they go, because it is peripheral knowledge that you tend to have to know when you're doing commentary. And eventually, I just kind of expressed my interest. I said to Mateo, who is now the NA RLCS regional manager, I was like, hey, you know what? If you need me for CRL stuff, I'd be down to help. Eventually, that just kind of led one thing to the other. And he was like, hey, I need some people for RLCS as well. Do you think you'd be interested in the spot? And I was like, absolutely. Heck yeah. I love the game. I can't imagine anything more, I guess, fulfilling on the esports side than literally being the arbiter of, like I said, competitive integrity in the game that I love the most. So it's really nice to have a direct impact on that. And that's kind of how I got into it, was just, I gained the peripheral knowledge from being a part of community orgs, doing CRL stuff, and you just kind of learn what the admin does after a while. And you realize, like, hey, I'd really like to do that. And I just gave it a shot, and it worked out pretty well.
Awesome. So you said that you were a caster first?
Yes. I started doing commentary. That was really my entry into the esports scene in late 2017. I shortly started working with College Cardball from there, so I've been with those guys for pretty much my entire career. So huge shout out to the CCA, and particularly Bumney, who got me involved in that. But yeah, I've been doing esports commentary for a good while, and I've been around the scene. I appeared on the Rival series in season 7 of the RLCS, which was a lot of fun. I have my thoughts about that, but I have had my opportunity time and again to appear on the mainstream, and I've been very involved in the CRL scene for quite a while.
So going in from the caster side to the admin side, what's like been your favorite moment as an admin to be a part of? Like, were you in the actual lobby when Justin scored the amazing 0 second goal, or like what's been your favorite moment just being able to be in the lobby watching these games happen?
Well, I think the biggest issue that I have with this, all right, sometimes you do get the big goals, and it's great, and you get to freak out and react all you want. But something that I always make a point of doing is, as soon as a goal is scored, checking the scoreboard to make sure nobody's having any connection issues. Because the last thing you want is to be freaking out and miss a call, miss a player saying like, "Oh, I DC'd right at the last second," or something like that. Because then obviously we'd have to go back and take a look at the footage and whatnot. But I think for me, to be honest, there are just so many different things that happen in a lobby where you get these ridiculous goals and things. And of course, having played the game for a long time, being a commentator, occasionally I'll just be watching the players, and I love how I get to analyze them in live time. But I don't actually have to like say it out to an audience. It's great to have that ability to think free flow. And I mean, to your point, having like a specific favorite moment, just nothing particularly comes up, strangely enough. Which also might be because of my terrible memory. I do have a notoriously bad memory when it comes to remembering specific moments. But a lot of the time as well, I get the chance to chat with the other admins because, focusing on the game, it doesn't really take a whole lot out of you. It's mostly just watching the pings, making sure that you don't see anybody stop on the field, things like that in general. And I actually really enjoy talking to the other admins. We do have a little bit of fun in the green room chat. Obviously, we don't get too carried away because then it might compromise our ability to actually do our job. But when it comes to favorite moments of being in a lobby, like I said, it just doesn't really come to mind because I'm focusing on enjoying, hanging out with the other admins. Like I said, they're great people. I love chatting with them in general. But then also, you're just kind of focusing on making sure that nobody's having any connection issues. A lot of the time, some of the hype can be taken a little bit out of the goal just because I want to make sure that nobody had any issues right there at the end.
So is there anything like outside the match that you do as an admin, or is it all specifically just making sure the match itself runs smoothly?
Well, when it comes to qualifiers in particular, we do occasionally have duties to help out with the bracket admin. Because obviously you have so many teams that enter into the RLCS qualifiers. So when it comes to that, yeah, we do a little bit of bracket admin stuff, and then for qualifiers on day 3, usually when you have those Swiss rounds, we'll handle the match admin on that side from there on. There are some things that we do outside of the match in order to help get the match set up. We have organizational tools for that. I'm not really allowed to go too much in depth about our whole process, but yeah, there's a couple of things that the normal match admins like myself, I'm not the regional manager. Mateo handles a lot of the, higher than my pay grade type stuff. And there are also some assistant head admins that will handle, for the most part, I guess they're kind of what the name implies, as assistant head admins. They help Mateo to handle some of the higher level stuff when it comes down to it. But yeah, I can't really get too much into how things go on behind the scenes because that is, I guess, restricted information to a degree. I was asked just not to share it because obviously then people could replicate it and,
Oh yeah, there's a certain level of you can't give away your entire business plan on some random dude's podcast. So I understand that. What is I guess when it comes to like the bracket stuff, like are you guys handling the seeding, or are you guys handling like just the people signing up and making sure like there weren't any glitches with the site, or what all aspects do you guys handle with that?
when it comes to particular aspects, I personally, like I said, I'm a bit lower level than a lot of the other people. But usually, I don't really have to worry about signups and things. So I'll usually just handle the bracket as it's actually happening, which I am quite grateful for because there can be a lot of problems with sign up and things. And that's not to say that admins like myself wouldn't be capable of handling that per se. I personally don't have a whole load of experience helping people through RLCS registration, but I know, like I said, a lot of the other admins that I work with are super experienced in that category, and I'm sure that they could handle that if need be. But for the most part, I think they just generally kind of handle the day-to-day bracket admin kind of stuff, which, again, very used to. It's very run-of-the-mill type stuff for those guys who have had so much experience in the industry. So, yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything particularly special about what we do outside in terms of qualifiers. It also is pretty straightforward for the most part. Using start.gg has become second nature for a lot of players. So as time goes on, Save for the newer players that come in, maybe they haven't used the site so much. It does get a little bit easier, and that's why I think that it's not really delegated to us, just because it doesn't really have to be.
Going into these brackets, like, are you a part of the seeding process, or what is the seeding process? If you can tell us at least in brief detail.
Well,
'Cause that's one thing
yeah.
that we've talked a lot about in the bubble scene. That's the one thing that, like, when it comes to RLCS quals, is have you heard the like death bracket and Mickey Mouse brackets?
Yes, okay, yeah.
So
I definitely know what you're talking about.
yeah,
I
so
mean, as far as seeding goes, I mean, particularly, are you making reference to the open bracket, or
yeah,
when you get more into closed qualifiers?
yeah, specifically the open bracket, because there's
Yep.
been a few times I'm just like, why are 3 to 5 rank X teams in the same day one bracket? So
Yeah.
that's the one thing that I'm curious from, and like I said, you may not be able to go into a lot of detail, but I would like to know just the general idea of how things are seeded, if possible, and maybe with this knowledge, maybe we can figure out like how to do seeding better, or at least have a conversation about it. Because I don't think you guys want death brackets and taking out top teams day one when they shouldn't. And obviously, the competitive scene doesn't want that either.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. And I think that I can fairly safely say that nobody behind the scenes wants death brackets for anyone. You know, but this problem has been addressed many times by the community, and there have been some responses, obviously, from people that are, again, above my pay grade, and I kind of have to stick with what they're saying. Nobody wants that, least of all us. Like I've said, all the people that work behind the scenes share the passion for the esport that all of the fans do out at home, and we don't want to have those kinds of issues for the players. What I can say is that we work our absolute hardest to make sure that the seeding reflects past results and team strength overall. There is a process, for closed qualities that we use, which is very systematic. I can't really say a whole lot about that. In
Yeah.
fact, you might have to cut that alone. But know that at all times, the seeding is done in the best faith possible. There is nothing really additional that I can comment about that personally. But I will guarantee you that seeding is personally overseen by people, as much as is possible.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to that stuff, I think there should be like at least an eye test on some brackets, and like at least like 6-man's rank checks. As much as I don't necessarily agree with 6-man's, I think it's the best we've got outside of just where you're placing RLCS wise. Well, that's kind of integrated because you can do well in RLCS and get 6-man's rank. But I think something that could be done, and this is what we actually talked about this on a previous podcast that with Pranav. I don't know if you're familiar with Tactical Bandits. It's a weekly tournament.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so like they've developed their point system when it comes to like their seating and like who gets invites, et cetera, et cetera. We were talking about possibly coming up with a way to have like a universal point system, something like Liquipedia tries to do, but better. Granted, Liquipedia, for those of you who don't know, it's an entirely volunteer organization for the most part. So the fact that they even have some point system that is somewhat functioning, even if it's not necessarily the most accurate, it's at least functioning, is pretty incredible. But what would you say about that as like maybe developing a system that's official, that's not Liquipedia points, but actual psionics points, I guess you would say? Do you think
Yeah,
that would be a cool idea, or something that may be possible in the future? Obviously, this is all speculation here. He is not speaking on behalf of Squid, or speaking on behalf of a psionics. So this is just two fans of the sport speaking right now.
Yeah, and I think, of course, with my perspective behind the scenes, I definitely think it's an interesting idea. And like I said before, we are always striving to have the best competitive integrity in the scene that we possibly can. I think the The issue, obviously, is the fact that implementation of such a system would require a very robust process in order to get working. And then having that implemented into the top level would, of course, require a lot more, I guess, research onto the topic, making sure that it accounts for every different scenario and exception and being able to familiarize all of the regional managers with that. Because if we were to move to a system like that, not only would the admins have to at least be somewhat familiar with it, because that extends down to the assistant head admins, which is a role that I've not yet filled personally, but they would probably have to know that. Mateo would have to know that. The NA regional manager, Scheist, Strangest Stranger, the guys who help head up the esports team would probably have to be familiar with that. Make sure that it's got their approval and all these things. All the regional managers for APAC South, APAC North, OCE, Sub-Saharan Africa, MENA, EU, everyone would have to be able to familiarize and pretty much approve of this concept. So it would be a much more lengthy process than I think people would realize. And that's not to say that they wouldn't be open to the idea, because I could almost guarantee you that if there was a better process in order to get teams into the right spot than the one that is already in place, they're probably already considering it. I can't really speak for them on that front because I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. That's well above my pay grade. But just to loop back around on what I said earlier, they want to make the scene as competitive as possible. They don't want to, lowball anybody. They don't want anybody to draw the short straw. But it is a thing that just happens sometimes. And, going back to the fact that such a system would take a long time to implement, I think something that people also need to realize is that no matter what system you use, when you get a large enough sample of teams, somebody is going to draw the short straw eventually. It just happens when you have such a wide selection of matchups that go on. At the end of the day, you're going to get tough matchups. You're going to get a little bit of bad luck just because that's the way it plays out for you. And I think one of the best arguments, for I guess not complaining about your bracket and all that was what Jorby put so eloquently, just win, with maybe a little bit more colorful language in there. But it is true. If you really are that good of a team, then at some point you should be able to prove it by beating teams that are better than you. So, I mean, you got to weigh your options there. Somebody's eventually going to draw the short straw, no matter what system you use, whether it's point-based or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you really are that good of a team, you will be able to prove it on the field. That's kind of my take on it personally.
Yeah, I think the main reason people complain about it is honestly the 6-man's rank that you can get from making it further into the bracket. Because I think overall, like the best teams are still getting through, just the way things are set up. Like the best teams on that day or on that weekend, they end up being the top 8 that then go into the closed quals. But I think where people get mad about it is because it's like, oh, are you a consistent day 2 team when you're talking to an org? Or are you rank A? Are you getting to like almost like it's that consistency level of, hey, are you getting through to that? And it's like, well, week 1, it's like you just signed with an org and then you have 3 rank X teams in your bracket and then your team. It's like, well, 2 of us aren't making it out and like you have some good games and like you get out day 1 and then your org goes and talks to you and goes, it's like, hey, I thought you were a consistent day 2 team. And so I think that's where not having something for the bubble scene specifically kind of hurts. And I think that's why people care so much about death brackets, just from like my conversations within the scene is
yes.
That's why I think it's such a big deal for people. Yes, the best teams are still getting through at the end of the day, but that process, and because there's like 6-man's rank attached to it, I think that's why people care so much.
No, I 100% agree with you on that. And I personally think that the problem that you describe, when people trying to get signed to an org and having to care about death brackets so much because of that kind of contract, I also agree that I think it's more important for the bubble scene to have more support. And that's why you've seen a couple of leagues, kind of like sprout up. The Melon Patch League, as you mentioned to me just before, I wasn't even familiar. And this is kind of the problem with this exact thing, right? It just doesn't have the publicity yet. But the AAACS, it was something that I worked on as a commentator. They had a $75,000 prize pool across the whole season. It was amazing. It got more bubble teams involved. But the problem was it was more bubble teams. I really appreciate what they were trying to do. They gave more publicity to the lower, I guess the lower of the RLCS teams of NA, right? It was mostly
Mhm.
teams that didn't qualify for the previous regional, but occasionally those teams would qualify for regional, such as a crew. We saw them, kind of go through it, and there was a little bit of less of a focus on the bubble teams for that reason. So you still get the problem of teams that get eliminated from day two that don't quite qualify for the AAACS, for instance. So I agree that there definitely is an issue there, but I also feel like to an extent that is unfortunately kind of on the orgs. And it would be nice if the bubble scene had a little bit more support, because I think then the orgs could apply a little bit more, or they could be a little bit more lenient on the RLCS performances, because occasionally you do get those 3 rank X teams in your bracket, and like I've said before, we don't intentionally try to essentially just give those teams a bad bracket. I've said before, we try to make it as absolutely fair as possible, but somebody is going to get the short straw at the end of the day. And if it just so happens that you get the short straw and your org is not willing to reconsider, I feel like that really is just an oversight on the org's part. And everything is a business, as well. I've kind of seen a little bit of this from the back end. I won't claim to be a professional in any way when it comes to signings and what you do with your team contractually, but it just seems a little bit short-sighted for me for an org to drop a team from one regional performance. So, I do agree. I would love for there to be more support for the bubble scene, and I really think that the solution going forward from problems like that with teams trying to get recognized, it is regrettable. But I think that there just needs to be more bubble scene support in general, and it would be great if we could get support from the community, but I also recognize how challenging it can be. I've seen many community orgs rise and fall over the course of these years. Back in the day when the game was originally, just a young esport. It was mostly community driven. Psyonix hadn't even started the first season of RLCS. You got stuff like Rocket League Circuit, Pro Circuit, even MLG way, way back in the day. For those of you who remember that, but thinking of like Mythical Gaming, Rival, or at the time Pro Rivalry League, which is I kind of messed that up, which is why they changed their name over to Rival. But you got Nexus Gaming, and Boost Legacy was one that kind of sprouted up. MLE, they are still running, strangely enough. Minor league doubles, they have been doing so much good work for the longest time. But back when it was all community orgs, it was great. But now we don't really have that. It's just not profitable, and that's why you don't get the bubble scene support that we so desperately need right now. And that's why I feel like the biggest letdown is for a lot of those players who are trying to reach into that RLCS level.
So my thought process on that, as far as like getting orgs more involved and invested in Rocket League, is right now, for the most part, unless you're like a top 8 team, you're not getting serious money from an org. And that
Yes.
just comes down to the RLCS system, where it's the top 8 stay, and then the 9 through 16 have to qualify again, and then they may be out day one of the RLCS regional. And so if you're looking at it just from a sheer business perspective, it's not worth a lot of money unless it's a top 8 team, because you're not going to get that representation, at least consistently. My thought process on this was, what if instead of having like 3 uh, regionals a split, turn it into a league and have 2 to 3 qualifiers at the start of the split, so that way you get 32 teams and they're playing in some form of league for that entire split. You can develop storylines. You can have like off broadcast, or I guess like off the day broadcast, means like ESPN type, hey, breaking down this play. It's like, what play did they use here, and how did they trick the defense here into going here instead of being here, and having like those breakdown shows. Uh, and then at the end of it, have our traditional 16-man tournament, uh, like we did this past year. How would you feel about that? So that way, like, it gives a little bit more storyline. It gives those bubble scene organizations more incentive to invest in a team because it's not just, hey, they're showing up for one day, maybe, but they're showing up for an entire season or like a miniature season. And that'll give them the org's representation and airtime. And then, two, it'll give the players stability because they're able to provide that airtime for the org.
Now, I do like that idea conceptually, you know? But I think that this is almost in a way a problem that has been actually addressed. This does present a problem that has been addressed, I think, by the 3 regional format per split, in that, many players talked about way back in the day when Rival Series and RLCS was running, one of the biggest things that they encountered, one of the biggest issues that they encountered that affected their drive to play the game was when you had those kinds of, beginning of the split qualifiers, and if you didn't make it, then you just had to wait. So, if you didn't make it out to the Rival Series, then you just had to wait until the next season of Rival Series started, which, who knows how long that could take. There might be half a year between qualifiers for you. So, like I said, conceptually speaking, I do love the idea of being able to build storylines around teams, but simultaneously, I feel like we do get a good mixture of that already with the current format. And that's why I think so many people actually quite enjoy it, is because you get teams, as I mentioned before, when I was talking about the AAACS, a Crew, for instance, they're a high quality team. They have some results against top 8 in the NA. However, they don't really have a consistent performance. So imagine if we were to use this kind of a system and a Crew, hot team, everyone expects to make it, and then at the beginning of the split, they just cannot perform and they miss out on the qualifiers. And then for the rest of that split, a Crew is just out of competition. That would be a relatively crappy situation for the players and for the organization. So at the same time that I agree with what you're saying, where, for the orgs that would make it in, it would be great. For the players that make it in, it would be absolutely phenomenal. They get experience against top players, consistent practice schedules, surely, scrims, the whole 9 yards. But for the teams that don't make it, it would just be another, I guess, failure, to add. And it would be a massive failure at that because, like I said, you would have to wait for so long for the next qualifier. I mean, obviously, we get a mixture of these two things. It would be great, but I just don't really see an ecosystem where having the three regional per split as well as a 32 team kind of league play would be able to coexist. It would just be too complicated.
Yeah, and so just to clarify, I mean, like, if we have like the winter, fall, and spring like regionals, and so like each one of those would be the miniature season. It wouldn't be like a year long season, and so
Yes.
because I think I think that something close to that would be like a good happy middle ground.
I do agree that we're trying to find a middle ground. I still think that for the players it would just be too demoralizing. I mean, even thinking about the length of time between the winter, I guess the fall, winter, and spring major. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you think about how long it is between those events, the split doesn't end until the major. So if we take a
Yeah.
look here, fall major was the 12th, the 12th month of the year. Sorry, I was reading that correctly. So it was December 8th to December 12th, and then you have the winter major, which was March 23rd. That's a 3-month gap. 3 month and roughly 20 days,
Mm-hmm.
15 days of a gap between majors. Imagine you didn't make the league play for the fall split. You have to wait 3 months essentially.
Mm-hmm.
If that's how we're going to take the metric,
Yeah.
which is a little bit inaccurate, I'm sure. But imagine waiting 3 months because you didn't make it through 2 qualifiers. You have a bad day on 2 days, and suddenly you're out of it completely. That would just be the worst feeling. And surely the orgs wouldn't be willing to stick around for all 3 months if you failed in qualifiers twice in succession. I mean, I just think that there's a little bit too much volatility there. And that's why I said that I personally am kind of in support of the 3 regional split thing, because you get more opportunity. And I think with the closed qualifiers as well, it almost feels like an extension of the RLCS. I think a lot of people see the closed qualifiers not necessarily, they're not, of course, on main event level, but it's still incredibly prestigious just to make it to the closed qualies, I feel.
Oh, absolutely.
I guess that's just my 2 cents on it. And of course, this is not necessarily me speaking as an admin, but as a fan. I just
Oh yeah.
personally am in support of the 3 regional format just because it does provide some variety. I also very much like how they switch up the format
Mm-hmm.
every split. That's a very unique idea. And overall, I think it makes for a wonderful year-long circuit.
Oh yeah, this was definitely by far, I think, the best season that we've had of RLCS.
Yeah.
So I've been watching RLCS since Lethamir was still on Ghost, so I've been around a minute.
Yeah, that was a long time. Oh my goodness, it's so weird to think about.
Yeah, it's like back when the Batmobile was still OP.
Oh man.
That's a throwback. People are gonna have to Google why the Batmobile was OP. So go do your
Gonna get all those
research on
videos
that.
of Over Zero at Season 1 Lamb.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Oh man, trip down memory lane there. I think the best thing so far is just like about the season was the willingness for Psyonix to experiment with format. Like,
Yes.
I feel like this was their let's try just about everything so we can either say this didn't work or wow, this was almost amazing if we had done this. And so that's what I like about this season. I feel like this was like the trial run for the entire future of Rocket League. So I think after the next 2 to 3 years, I think we're going to have a dialed in system as to how Rocket League will be played. And I think once that's set in place, I think it's going to be a lot easier for Psyonix to kind of shift some of their attention to supporting the bubble scene and creating like feeder programs.
Yeah, that may be true. I feel though, to a reasonable extent, I could argue, and I will actually, that Psyonix has actually been doing a bang-up job, of supporting the scene in just about every way. I mean, you talk about the evolution, and this kind of being one of the first steps for Rocket League. Many argue about whether or not it should be qualified as a Tier 1 esport. I personally am on that train. I think that Rocket League at this point, they got 3 majors a year plus the World Championship if we continue with this format, which I absolutely think they should. No bias. But the amount of money they put into it, the amount of depth that there is in each respective scene, the fact that South America has now solidified themselves as a major contender within the international scene. OCE, obviously, they've been around for a while. APAC, hopefully they'll have some more improvements. I just think we have to admit they're still not quite there. But, Middle East and North Africa, they have shown incredible improvement. They almost had a LAN win, which I personally would have been very excited about. But all these things combined, I think that should make Rocket League a Tier 1 esport. But this dates back, in my opinion, much further than even RLCS this year, RLCS X, the previous season. We used to have DreamHack Pro Circuit. We used to have E-League happening occasionally. We've had some Beyond the Summits, which are my personal favorite. But I think that, looping back a little bit to what I was saying earlier, how everybody on the admin team, for instance, really loves the esport. That extends not only to the admin team, but some of the people who work directly with Psyonix on the esport, which is not to say that we don't. Mateo is more involved. Like I said, I'm just a lowly admin. But you got people behind the scenes that they pulled directly from the community. They were pulled because they showed a massive investment and love for the esports team. Of course, I'm referring to Shice and Strange Stranger particularly. Those guys are great. They do amazing work. I think that they have helped to elevate Rocket League to the level that it is at right now. And I feel that they're going to continue to try to support the scene in just about any way they can, which extends to the bubble. But I think,
you have to
also
solidify the pro scene before you can start worrying about the amateur scene.
Yes. And if I'm being perfectly honest, if we're going to be comparing, I guess, to other esports, you'll get scenes like Dota 2, CSGO, which, to be honest, I mean, to my knowledge, which I'm not particularly knowledgeable about these scenes, granted, but to my knowledge, there are not nearly as many teams that you'll see in the respective regions that will challenge top 8 or top 12 teams.
I think that's partially because of franchising.
This is also true, yes. I will agree to that. And, of course, with CSGO and Dota 2, the team size is a little bit larger. Coaching is a little bit more important as well, because it can usually happen a bit more so in lifetime. So I think we're kind of comparing apples to oranges in that respect, and I'll give you that point. But I think, to my point personally, I think that there are a lot more teams that you could argue are in contention for the major, for instance. You see a lot of teams with very talented players that people expect to make the major that just don't quite get there. And I think that kind of depth in RLCS is the thing that most people love. There can be a lot of speculation. People will pick, Furia to win Worlds, and
I
nobody
was
actually
one of
expects it
those
to
people.
happen, right? But then
I was
they
one of
make
those
top
people.
four. Yep, then they make top four, and I'm over here like, oh my god, I want them to win so badly, and then they just couldn't do it, which
Yeah.
was unfortunate. But
I'll be honest, if BDS had shown up at this LAN like they had shown up at the past two LANs, Furia would be world champions right
oh
now.
yeah, oh yeah. Well, I don't know. Furia G2, that would be an interesting one. That would be a wonderful rematch.
That would be a good match too. But
It would
I'll
be a
be
good
honest, I think everybody. I was hanging out with some BDS fans. I don't know if you know Top Gun.
Yeah.
But we were hanging out during that Furia match, and when Jan scored that goal to tie it up,
Oh man.
I screamed so loud that I jump scared her as well as the 3 rows in front of me.
Wait, sorry, you jump scared them, so they weren't cheering too. How could you not be excited for that?
Yeah, I think they didn't expect to hear somebody screaming. Like, it's one thing to be cheering, but I was top of the lungs because I had been saying, like, since the LA major, Furia can take Worlds as soon as they sort out their defense. And then the London LAN happened, and they started to look better. And then when they showed up to Worlds, it was, okay, yeah, like, they can do this because they've been working on their defense, and that's been steadily improving all year. Yeah, it was funny. Everybody kind of gave me weird looks. There's like, what?
Nah.
But it was funny seeing all of them like do that little whoa, like what just happened?
Yeah. All right, this is gonna be my hot take of the day. I really just absolutely, despise with all my heart people who are biased towards their region. And that's not to say. Sorry, I should rephrase that. I despise people who will actively like boo for other regions. If you choose not to cheer for another region because you're a huge G2 fan or something, I guess. But at the end of the day, I personally, you and I have been around the Rocket League scene for so long now. I'm just a fan of quality Rocket League.
Yeah.
Why can't we just agree to be fans of good Rocket League?
Yeah,
That's,
and I think that's starting to become more and more of a thing.
Yeah.
I think it's good to kind of have that like kind of healthy like friendly jab at each other. I love trolling K Corp fans on Twitter. Like you guys are just so easy to impression farm. I'm sorry, but
yeah. I understand the bias a little bit too. I was at CRL Worlds, and I'm watching my teams that I've been watching all season long compete against the EU teams. It's like I really wanted to root for the EU teams because I even have friends. I have one of my personal friends, Pads. I used to coach her back when she was on the Venus Vixens. We did a season. She was on one of the teams I was competing there, and I was still torn because I watched one of these teams that I really wanted to see advance in the bracket playing against Pads, and I'm like, oh god, I don't know who I cheer for. So it's just kind of one of those issues. So I can kind of understand where they're coming from, but I don't know.
It's all in good fun. So all the K Corp fans that seriously think I think K Corp is rank B, man, understand the internet better. It's just some friendly trolling. I don't know if you saw all of that stuff. But that was probably, I think, my greatest Twitter troll ever, just across region.
Twitter truly is it's the Wild West.
Yeah, it was hilarious. All the people that were thinking like, oh yeah, he actually thinks they're rank B, and it's like, no, I just think they're insanely consistent with no pop-off potential. Like, and I think they kind of showed that. But I guess, going in and talking about teams, that's kind of my opinion of K Corp. Who is your hot take opinion of teams?
Oh boy. Oh boy, this is an interesting one. I feel like I had so many hot takes. I gotta go back and check the finals because oh man. Who was it? I remember saying that somebody was washed, but I can't remember who in particular it was. Oh goodness. I want to say it was NRG. I just feel like they have not been getting the results that they should have been getting for quite some time now. Envy not making it though. That one kind of shocked me. I'll be honest. I have my opinions about Team Envy, but the general NRG, I feel like if they haven't already made a roster move, I can't help but feel like it might be on the horizon.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Like I've thought for a minute that NRG, because they set the standard for so long, that they stopped pushing higher because there was no reason for them to do it. And then now a whole bunch of teams figured out how to beat them in a couple different ways. And then now they're on the back foot trying to build that momentum up of learning how to counter those strategies and play styles. And so I think the other teams just were already in the process of learning a little bit more versus like sustaining. And so I think they're still making that switch from sustaining back into learning. But either way, top 8 at Worlds still isn't bad.
No, it's not, but I just feel like NRG, it feels like they've been having some confidence issues for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really place my finger on it, though. I've never been a particularly avid fan of theirs. I also half expected FaZe to do a little bit better, but they made top 4, so you can't really complain about that.
Yeah, that's FaZe, third, fourth.
Yeah, I just feel like FaZe deserves... I feel like the strength they have on their team, it feels like they should have put up some results. I think they were rumored to have a roster change going on with AJ, if I'm not mistaken.
I'll leave that to Shift.
He was benched, actually, so I'm fairly certain that something's going to happen there. I'm not sure. First killer, one of the best in the world, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully he doesn't suffer from Sypical syndrome, where he is, undisputedly one of the best in the world and then kind of drops a little bit off into a more secondary role. I just feel like Sypical hasn't really been up to snuff ever since his days on Space Station, personally.
Mm-hmm.
Take that with a grain of salt, though. Yeah, I've not been watching RLCS nearly as religiously as I used to, so if there are any Sypical stands out there, I apologize. Yell at me on Twitter, at Squid TV.
Yeah, I think FaZe's problem is them just now getting a coach that's a real coach. Because I don't even think they had one for a long time, and then they just picked up Roldiz.
Yeah, I think I am curious personally. If anybody has any experience with this, which you may, but I personally kind of question, the coaching of, and I feel like this is just wrong inherently. I guess my perception of characters like Sizz, for instance, coach of the General NRG, he's always been like a memer in the scene. Mm-hmm. It's like as if a team picked up Rizzo as their coach, and my perception of Rizzo is not necessarily the takes this seriously kind of person. So I don't really know how Sizz coaching is. This is purely conjecture, but I just don't know. This might also be because it's the General NRG. Like I said, I feel like they've been having confidence issues, and that might just be the cards that he was dealt. But I feel like the coaching might not have necessarily been so effective. When I saw NRG take their timeouts during Worlds, I was not particularly impressed with the results thereafter. Versus, for instance, version 1, and I have some friends who can actually speak to this. I was doing a watch party with some of my friends in Edgewood. Shout out to Zodic for hosting us. Very fun. And I remember watching version 1 in the quarterfinals of the final bracket, and they took their time out, and I mentioned, like, hey, man, I really feel like this is what version 1 needs to do in order to beat FaZe. And I listed off, like, a couple of different things, and I watched the next match, and it looked like they changed those exact things. Not to toot my own horn a little bit, but I have been doing this for a long time, doing analysis. And I feel like, the experience comes from Fireburner, who I, again, don't really see as a memer in the scene. So that's probably just my personal perception and bias. But
that's the hard thing about coaching, or like judging coaches, at least from like the outside perspective, is because a lot of what they do is behind the scenes. It's very hard to judge that. But I would say, except with Fireburner and Chrome, just because they're the two like very tactically minded coaches. And so when you see them make a change with their team and how their team's playing, it's obvious if you understand Rocket League. And so I think outside of those two, like, it's very hard sometimes to tell who is just a mental coach versus like who's really tactically analyzing what's going on.
I think with that as well, I mentioned how I personally don't really see the impact that it has.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned, Sizz could very well be one of the better coaches in the scene, and NRG perhaps just doesn't respond to that style as well as he would like, or perhaps he has to be more of a mental coach. Maybe he's a really tactical player, which at the end of the day is probably true of just about any of the top players, former top players. But it just so happens that NRG's primary issues lie with their confidence in their performance rather
Mhm.
than their actual gameplay. I feel like Roldiz might be, fitted into the same category there, where I feel like he definitely knows a lot of top level tactics, but he's on a team where, he got 3 young gun players. They might not necessarily respond so well to the tactical advice, which, as I think about it, I don't necessarily feel like that's true, but it's a real possibility. And like you said, you never really know what's going on. You can see them on stage. Of course, they're in the zone and they're serious. So despite what you see outwards of them in the community, doubtless they're trying their best.
Oh, absolutely. And that just comes down to when you're talking to like different teams and what they need, it's like, well, what type of coach do they need? And then you're starting to see organizations go, why are we waiting and figuring out which coach we need? And why don't we just grab all
Yeah.
three? And so I think that's going to be a move towards where I think there's going to be a head coach. And then I think there's going to be eventually maybe even like a mechanics coach and a tactical coach. And then also like a mental coach under that. So I could see teams having a 4-man staff of Rocket League coaches for each org at the high level coming soon. Maybe not necessarily mechanics coach, but I could see that as a possibility.
Well, I certainly wouldn't doubt if some organizations already had multiple coaches. I know I remember seeing some sort of editorial about Dignitas way back in the day where they had like physical trainers, like
Yeah.
not necessarily even related to the game, but just I guess people that were there to physically train the members of Dignitas. And you see how that changed K-Dop. He's a buff monster now. Before when he was on Gale Force in Season 4 land, this man was like a twig on stage, and now he's just over here casually benching other players, probably.
Yeah.
So
Healthy body, healthy mind.
yeah, exactly. So I think that was kind of the mindset there for Dignitas. So I wouldn't doubt if there were a multitude of organizations that already had something like that. You see teams that already play in the same facilities. Version 1 is one that comes to mind instantly. So I do like the direction that teams are going in that regard. And speaking of coaches, this is a little bit of a recall here in the conversation, but back onto the admin side, if you would. I very much appreciate how Rocket League, and particularly the people on the esports side, this was a decision, of course, made without my judgment. I wasn't even an admin at the point where they decided to do this, but including coaches on stage, I think was a massive change for Rocket League esports.
Oh, yeah.
As far as I know, they are allowed to talk to the teams as games are happening, which I would personally consider to be a huge change. Even when I said I did 1 season of coaching with the Venus Vixens, something that I really shied away from doing, or I also helped out the Crimson Wings limitedly back when they were competing in the RLCS in Season X. It was almost, I almost felt like it was taboo to talk to the team during games. Didn't want to ruin their focus or anything like that. But I do also understand that there could be value in that.
So, well, I coach 2 teams. So I coach a college team that's D3. So it's a lower, I say lower ranked, but they're all hanging around GC1 right now.
Yep.
And then obviously Audacity. So we're top 40-ish. And with my college team, 2 of them were football players when we were developing our system. And so as they were pushing down the field, I would be watching all 3 screens and I would call a play and they would position themselves. And so I was kind of like their in-game game sense just for them. And so they could just focus on execution of whatever the play it is that I called. Obviously at the higher level, I don't need to do that. And it's much more fine-tuned as to, hey, look, we just need to be watching out for this if they're not noticing it, or hey, they're changing up what they're doing. Like, yes. So there's definitely a difference between the, I guess you would call that amateur and almost pro scene. But I think coaches are going to become much more important, and that's also a personal bias as to why I want a league system, because I want coaches to be able to make the most impact as possible. And if I have a week to prepare for my match, that's going to be some good match. And if you don't have a coach that's serious, I don't think you're going to be able to compete at that high level if you're not doing that replay analysis and such. There's also that personal bias about my idea.
Yeah, I think I could really see both sides of the argument there. Coaches I very much see the value in that. You mentioned being able to call plays. I feel for the top level of play, unless you're very experienced, that might that may or may not be something that you choose to
Yeah,
endeavor with.
at the
Making play
pro
calls.
level, not so much.
Exactly.
It's more so coaching them to recognize what's best in these types of situations, and then they kind of call the play themselves more or less.
Yes.
And then like like I'll be watching and being like, okay, like this is what they're doing that's
Hmm.
working or preventing us from scoring, or here is what we're doing that we need to change. Because
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
it's like making those slight variations on plays versus the college level that I'm at. If they execute the play in any way, shape, or form, they're going to score 80% of the time, or at least get a shot on net 80% of the time, just with our conference's competition so
Yeah.
far.
I think definitely the most value that you'll find in pro level coaching is the ability to recognize opposing strategy and guide your team in the right direction. Because you know that if you tell them like, "Hey, I really want you to go with X strategy for this game," and it turns out that the opposing team is using a counter strategy to that, and it works perfectly for them, just say like, "Okay." We really need to shift over to this because the players are obviously going to be focusing on the mechanical side. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more difficult to make that mental 180 in the middle of a game. And you see teams between games, they'll often, have that strategy change. During timeouts, they'll have that strategy change, and it works out perfectly for them. Um, so I think that's where most of the coaching is right now in the Rocket League scene. It's either, mentality coaching, keeping players' heads in the game, making sure they're not getting down on themselves, for maybe missing a touch or something, maybe missing a demo, missing a save, etc. Or it's strategy coach. Like, not necessarily like, hey, make this play in this situation. But it's like, hey, the opponent is going for a lot of demolitions, but their third is pushed very far upfield. So if you can make power clears, you can avoid all that pressure. Stuff like that. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value in that. And you mentioned replay analysis and all these things, being able to identify what the opponents are good at and all that. And like I said, I think that's why I very much agree with the idea of having coaches being able to talk during the games with the teams. So
Yeah, if anything,
yeah,
just between goals, just be like, "Hey, look, we didn't score there because you were positioned too close and to the net versus keeping momentum." It's like just work on that, and we'll be fine next game. They're giving it to us, or we'll be fine next goal. They're giving it to us, or hey, they're leaving the backboard open because we're so aggressive with our second man pushing in early and demoing their third or demoing their second man, and they're expecting that midfield pass. So like try and put it far backboard. They're giving us that space and just like kind of more calling to their attention things they may not notice just because, or it's so mentally intensive to play that mechanically and that consistent, let alone to be analyzing and making all those types of decisions. If you can just be like, hey, look, this team's giving us this space, so let's take it. I think that's where a lot of understanding of the game and understanding of where that space actually is. That's where I see a lot of coaches fail is there's like, oh, the space is open right now, but they're rotating through it. And so if you can time your attack there, they're going to give you that space.
well, it's a challenging game through and through.
Yeah. Yeah. Before,
I think we've gotten this one pretty well down
yeah.
at this point.
It's a big game of rock, paper, scissors is what it is.
Well, you do appreciate how the meta kind of evolves in cycles to an
Oh, yeah.
extent. Where demolitions are king for a while, and then I guess just playing as quickly as possible, ball chasing can be meta for a while, or being a very strong defense. Having very incredibly robust rotations can be strong for a while. And I think that teams have started to realize that all of these things can be good in the right spot, and that's where you kind of get the chess vibes, where it's all about understanding your opponent's attacks and defenses and deciding what would be best to try to counter that in general. So that's kind of where I see the meta going. Um, but that's just me.
Yeah.
What
That's,
what do I know at the end of the day? Yeah, I'm just some lowly commentator analyst who doesn't really know everything about the scene. But I think we can generally put that one to rest.
oh,
So
yeah.
there's your esports talk of the day. Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
definitely. Well, I guess as we're wrapping up here, we're coming up on an hour. So, is there anything that you'd like to talk about in the last couple minutes, or anything
I
that you would
mean,
like to plug? I don't know if you've got a Twitch stream or anything that you do. But yeah, feel
well,
free to start plugging yourself and
I mean,
as well.
obviously, I already mentioned, my Twitter at Squid TV. Um, I occasionally post on that. I've been a bit more quiet of late, but I got some other stuff, coming up here, stream wise. The Immortals bash, I think, that we're doing for CCA, which is going to be very fun. We're actually including some pro players as well as collegiate in that. It's kind of like a little bit of a mashup, so I'm very excited that I'm going to be on those streams a couple of times this weekend here, the 17th and 18th, and then hopefully some more in the future, but I guess that remains to be seen. But yeah. Other than that, just I'm just out here having a good time on Twitter.
Same here. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a lot of fun learning about some of the behind the scenes as much as you can tell us about it, and then just being esports fans for the past half hour. So,
Oh yeah, I love it, and that's what I came here to say at the end of the day is we love doing work behind the scenes because we're invested in the esports scene. I think you can kind of see that in some of the stuff that I was able to talk with you about here. So it's been awesome.
yeah, well, all right. Well, hey, everybody go check them out. Links will be in the description. And this is JC signing off.